I was a pretty hotshot composer in New York in those days, and I ran into Bob Costello, who was a friend. Bob Costello was about to produce Dark Shadows, and he said, "Hey, Cobert, I've got a new show going on in the air. Are you interested in doing it?" I said, "Well, I'd like to meet the producer and read the script and talk to him, see what's going on." So I went up to Dan's office, and Dan and Bob were there, and I immediately liked Dan. He's a completely different type from the people that a spark happened. And we talked about it a little bit, and he gave me the script, and he gave me his ideas, and I went home and read the script, and it smelled hit to me. It really smelled hit. I came back and said, "Okay, I'd like to do it." And he said, "Fine, you're hired." And that was it. That's what the relationship has been. Just absolutely 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And from that point on, he said, "Well, how am I going to hear the music?" And I said, "Well, you're not going to hear the music. You're not going to hear the music until you've already paid for it and it's already been recorded." And he said, "Well, what happens if I don't like it?" And I said, "Well, tough. You're stuck if you don't like it. That's the way these things work." So he said, "Fine, okay, let's proceed on that basis." And he said, "But I'd like to hear the theme." I said, "Well, I don't have a theme yet. I just read the script." And I said, "The way I prefer to work is that I would like to start writing some of the backgrounds and get myself immersed in this spooky scene here, in this Dark Shadow scene. And at that point, a theme will come to me. And sure enough, is that okay with you, Dan? And then I'll come up and I'll do the theme for you." And he said, "Yeah, that's fine. Anything you want to do." He was very reasonable in those days. He still is, actually. He's a terrific guy to work with. And sure enough, one morning I was shaving there at my apartment in New York, and in came the theme. Ba-da-dee, ba-da-da-dee, da-da. There it was. And I said, "This sounds absolutely right." So I called Dan and I said, "I've got it." And he said, "Well, how am I going to hear it?" And I said, "Well, you want to come to my studio?" And I thought, "No, I don't want my studio playing it on the piano. It's not anything that should be played on a piano. It's not, it's kind of a weird thing." I said, "I'll come up to your office." And he said, "Well, you going to bring a band up or something?" I said, "No, I'll just come up and I'll do the theme for you." So I get up to the office, and Costello is there. He's sitting on the sofa, and Curtis is there. He's putting golf balls. He was a great golfer. And maybe he still is, for all I know. And he said, "Okay, what is it?" So I said, "All right, just open your mind." And it's a low flute and a high wee thing going on. And it goes. And I'm shaking my head around doing all this number, and he looks at me and his eyes light up. He says, I love it, it's sensational, it's great, blah, 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 blah. So that was the thing with Dark Shadows, and that was how I got involved. And, now, what is it, 25 years later, 30 years later, 190 years later, whatever it is. I did a movie with Dan called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And there was a spot there where I needed a tune, which I thought to myself, this is the spot where if this were a feature film, I'd write the hit song. And I wrote Quentin's theme. This is before it was Quentin's theme. It was just, a piece of music that was used at that point. And about 3 or 4 months after that, excuse me, Dan called me and said, "Kobe, you got to come down to the office. We got a new spook coming onto the show, and I want to discuss a piece of music for him." I said, "Okay," and I got down to the office, and he started describing it to me. He said his name is Quentin, and he appears first to everybody out of an 1890 out of an old phonograph record, era about 1890, right at the beginning of the phonograph era. And I didn't particularly want to write anything for something like that because it sounded very corny to me. And I suddenly thought of this tune that I had done for Jekyll and Hyde. And I thought it would be perfect, and I knew that Dan loved it. And I said, "What about the thing that I did for Billy Whitelaw and Jekyll? Dee-da-dee-da-dum, dee-da-dee-da-dum." And he said, "Great, I love that. That's just great." He said, "Let's do it." So I went to a studio. I had originally recorded on violin and piano. And I went to a studio and took out all the highs and made it sound, added scratch and made it sound like an old phonograph record. And the rest is history. It went on the air, and there were immediately thousands and thousands of letters, and it became a recording, and it became a major hit for us.